Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I welcome Pranav Ganeswaran, who is a medical student based in Australia. In this episode, Pranav shares his journey of being diagnosed with epilepsy and how being a medical student helped him with his own diagnosis. Pranav explains how being diagnosed with epilepsy allowed him to gain more awareness and empathy for others. Now, Pranav is raising awareness around mental health and using his own story as a springboard to help others. At the end of the episode, if you could leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. All right, Pranav, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time and giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to, introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work you're doing and where you are currently. And and then we can kind of get into our conversation for this episode.
Thank you very much, Furkan, for having me on this conversation, this podcast. It's a brilliant way to get to meet like-minded people and have these kind of conversations, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little bit about myself. So it's a big question, but to put it in the best way, I'm a final year medical student studying in Perth, Western Australia. And I come from an Indian heritage, but
Mm-hmm.
I lived half my life in Africa and have been living my other half here. So over that journey, I have had multiple experiences with moving, stresses in family, cultural integration, including bullying, and along with that, just kind of finding a sense of meaning through both all of that and struggles such as medical challenges, such as my recent diagnosis with epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
So as a future medical professional, I find a lot of these aspects of my life and experiences really go to helping me be a better person holistically, as well as bring these traits to work with people professionally and non-professionally,
Mm-hmm.
on a day-to-day basis. So probably we could unpack on a little bit of that as we talk more.
For sure. And one of the things that I really enjoy is watching your content on Instagram and the artwork, but behind the art, there's always a story. Do you mind kind of elaborating on that and what inspired you to kind of share your story in that fashion?
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting. So that page kind of just sprung up by itself. So it started off as an individual idea, a way of me being able to keep up with the busyness of day-to-day life while also being there for the people I cared about and I loved. It was meant to just be something of a very small private thing where I would post my reflections, my thoughts and feelings, because I really do feel that a lot of us have these deep thoughts and feelings sometimes, things that we might not be very comfortable sharing, but oftentimes we all have these kind of thoughts anyway. And I thought putting them out there is a way, for other people who come across it, mainly my friends, but other people, to bounce off them and feel like, oh, we are part of a community, we're together in something. So over time, it kind of has changed its aesthetic. The stories I kind of like depicting my reflections. A lot of the content I post is my reflections as I journey through this path.
Mm-hmm.
I don't come from a perspective of someone who knows what I'm doing, but more so as someone who's walking the journey along with everyone else that follows me on that. So kind of we're all holding hands and walking together as we reflect. and support each other as a community. And that's where it is right now. And hopefully I want to build on that as I go.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And like, do you do the art yourself? Like, you kind of designing it yourself, or?
No, so I'm not artistically inclined at all. So unfortunately, but that is something that I've been looking forward into doing more in doing some of my own graphical design and illustration. But currently I use Canva to do all of that.
Okay.
And there's some amazing, beautiful graphics on there. Kind of just play on what looks good and what sounds good according to the theme of the post. And, just over time, it's just become this second nature thing where things just align beautifully, I guess.
Yeah,
For
no,
me
it's
to do.
really cool. And I guess, speaking of journey, I like the way you put it, that you don't have all the answers, and I feel like most people, like including myself, none of us have the answers in the moment, and we're just trying to figure it out and take our best, doing our best in the moment in terms of what we know at that time, and going through this journey of life. But you mentioned your recent diagnosis with epilepsy. Do you want to kind of walk us through in terms of how that came about? What were some of the emotions attached to it, and how that's allowed you to shift your perspective in, as we were talking before, becoming a medicinal practitioner in the future? It's just change your perspective on things. So yeah, if you want to kind of talk us through that, and some of the emotions that came with it as well.
Yeah, definitely. So it has been a very big part of my life, especially more recently, something that I've had to kind of come to terms with. And I went through my own process of grief through all
Hmm.
of that. Um, I am quite lucky in terms of my physical impairment due to my epilepsy is not significant compared to what the general perception of epilepsy is, which is kind of, the fits, people losing consciousness and having those shakes. That's the kind of classical idea we have of epilepsy. So with me, it started off about 3 years ago. I was doing my undergraduate studies, or early. The timing is a bit unclear for me now, but
Hmm.
I just remembered. So it was the vaguest of symptoms. I'd be walking or just doing day-to-day activities when I'd suddenly feel this sense of deja vu, like a pit in the stomach, kind of rising feeling. And I would have no clue as to what it was. Sometimes I'd just have this overwhelming sense of just needing to escape from that feeling of overwhelm. So I was thinking, all this time, whether it was like an anxiety thing or something like that, because that's kind of the mainstream. It's quite important. Mental health has been on the horizon, which I am a big advocate of as well on the
Hmm.
side. So I was always thinking, and 2 years I've been having more and more of these episodes until one point I just got quite concerned because it will be quite powerful in the moment. I remember once I was sitting in a group of 20 people and it just hit like that, like a lightning bolt. And I just, thankfully it doesn't impair me, but it just puts me out of the spot, kind of like an out of body
Hmm.
kind of feeling, and I feel overwhelmed. So it just made me realize something is not going right. Went to GPs, so family practitioners here, and my symptoms are quite vague. So unfortunately, they didn't know what it was either. So they were thinking, could it be anxiety? So continuously having symptoms like these and going back to the doctor, and they're thinking it might be nothing. It could be anxiety. Just make things kind of not progress.
Hmm.
I think the biggest part of the difficulty was not knowing what I was experiencing.
Hmm.
Um, so then finally, I think I gained the courage, and thankfully, studying medicine helps as well. So you get a little bit more of an insight into what's going on, and a little bit of searching myself. Kind of found these symptoms fit along with a form of epilepsy called temporal lobe epilepsy. So I spoke to my doctor about this, and I asked her, "Can you please refer me to a specialist?" Got all that underway, went to see the doctor, and he immediately, based on my symptoms, said, "Yes, this is what you have." Then, after that came the what next. So to confirm it, I had to be put on these home tests. So I had to get a brain scan done. That was all normal. I got a single EEG done, which is all normal. But so because of all that, they hooked me up onto this 10-day EEG monitoring. So checking all the brain waves for 10 days straight. And it was, I looked like one of those Mortal Kombat cyborg characters with 30 wires coming off my head. And it was, I couldn't shower for 10 days. So I feel bad for anyone that was near me during that time.
Yeah.
But after all that, I came up with my diagnosis and started my meds, which still give me side effects. So, you know, my whole life changed since then. Still fortunate, because if I ever have an episode of where I lose consciousness, I lose my ability to drive. I'm a big blood donation advocate. I love donating blood. And the last time I went, they said, no, you have chronic illness. You can't do it anymore. So that was quite upsetting. Even though I know I'm not physically as impaired, it's just a sense of why can't I do this anymore? And just small things like having to renew my driving license every year, and just having to deal with all these side effects of the medications I take, which are not very pleasant. Anti-epileptic medications are known for their quite nasty side effects. So, you know, waking up and having to deal with this brain fog, this brain slowness for 2 hours a day, and then at the end of the day, you know, having to sleep much earlier than I used to is something that I've had to learn to cope with and come to terms with. And it has been a big change. So coming back, long story short, it allows me to really empathize with people going through chronic illness. It's more than just the disease. It's the side effects of medication. It's changes to quality of life. It's these small things which actually make the bigger difference, not so much the actual, you know, illness itself. So this goes to mental health, anxiety disorders, depression, and you know, these are very common things out in the public, and in people that, you know, I probably know, you probably know, a lot of people listening to this probably know and have a deep experience with. And you know, it's that understanding that helps. You know, it's the quality of life. It's not just the disease, it's the person that comes along with it.
Right.
It's, you know, what's happening in their life surrounding that. And you know, I'm very blessed, to be honest, to have this experience, because going forward, I now have this insight into what it feels like. And I think it will allow me to engage with a bit more empathy and understanding from where I come from. So, you know, in summary, that's kind of the gist of that.
Yeah. No, thanks for walking us through like the journey of it. And you know, just, it's beautiful how you said, like, moving forward, you're making an opportunity out of this experience in terms of how you're going to approach the future, and even working with future patients, just having that empathy. That's amazing. And I guess one of the things, like you said, often we don't really put emphasis on when we know people are struggling, is obviously the side effects of medication, but even the mental health challenges that come with it, right? And I'm sure, and I don't know if this is something you've experienced, but I'm sure people can experience depression from just knowing that their quality of life has changed and they have no control over it, or a form of anxiety knowing that, you know, I have to wake up tomorrow, as you said, with a brain fog. Is that something you had to deal with as well? And what was it like just initially when you didn't even know what this was, but you knew something was wrong, and working with doctors trying to figure it out, at least in the initial stages?
So, you know, I think it's very important to talk about this, and this is something that actually I find more difficult to talk about. The epilepsy bit is the easy bit, but so I haven't had experience with, you know, feeling quite low mood and depression around this, but anxiety is something that I've kind of been dealing with for a long time in general. But you know, coming down to not knowing what was going on with me was a big source of anxiety. And then right after that, a large part of me now retrospectively looking back at it was self-denial. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually hadn't started my treatment until 6 months or so post my diagnosis, simply because I just couldn't come to terms with the fact that, I had a medical condition that could impact everything in my life if, at some point one thing could go wrong. And still, I don't know about what will happen in terms of progression, and that's always at the back of my mind. Um, the minute I, maybe develop a full seizure, like a lot of people do have, there goes a lot of the freedoms I currently do have, and that anxiety has always been there. The anxiety of, being on a clinical placement in the morning with all the doctors and all the other medical students who are quite on the ball, very fresh, and my mind is still fogged up.
Mm-hmm.
It is difficult because it's hard to explain how you're feeling to everyone.
Yeah.
But that mental health, it's very important that you brought it up, because I find that that's one of the most important parts of my life, and what I try to, I guess, destigmatize, because sometimes it is more difficult talking about the mental health aspect of chronic illness, or even a normal person, an average person going through mental health concerns. There's this, it has been getting a lot better over the years, and seeing the brilliant movements that have been happening, but there's still that bit of stigma where, to be honest, I would still feel much more easier talking about, oh, I have epilepsy, than saying I have anxiety around this. But I
Mm-hmm.
think, being able to open up to that vulnerability just brings people together, hits the nail on the issue that, this is one of those quality of life factors that can, really make or break a person. And, opening up about this allows, more access to supports and understanding and empathy. And with me, that's something that I'm still working on, in
Mm-hmm.
all honesty. And I think um, these are demons we all face, and we can never truly, overcome them fully. They keep coming back, but we get better at manage them as it goes. And I think that's a big part of the progress and growth and learning. And learning to live out of this is, taking all these as building blocks and bricks and paving your own path using
Mm-hmm.
them, instead of allowing them to bog you down and hold you back, because it is what it is. This is my life, this is what I have, and it is up to me to make the most out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety, epilepsy, and whatever else that has happened in the past and may happen in the future. So that are my brief those are my brief thoughts around it. But mental health is a big aspect that I find is very important. I can talk a lot more on.
Yeah, yeah, no, if you don't mind expanding, I guess one of the questions before we go down that path, I wanted to understand is, you mentioned the anxiety and the possible frustration of trying to figure out what was going on. And what I found, I guess it's somewhat unique that you were able to, being a medical student, kind of fit, be able to match your symptoms with a form of epilepsy, but not everyone's able to do that, right? And often it could be a long, gruesome journey of trying to get to the bottom of it. And often if a doctor can't fit the symptoms, they may dismiss it, right? And yeah, so in your case, I guess, would you consider yourself fortunate that you were able to, at least, being a medical student, figure that out and not have to go down that journey of frustration and the constant questioning of, okay, am I making this up in my head? Is this real? And then what do you have to say about people that often don't get to the bottom of it as soon as you did?
Actually, I think that's a brilliant point that you make. And surprisingly, I think I am very, very, very lucky to be in the position I was. And,
Mm-hmm.
even despite that initial inkling, maybe some of the terminology that I've used to Google and having a bit of an idea of what was going on would have initially helped. I still remember walking into my family doctor's room and discussing this. And she's a great doctor. She's looked after me well, but even
Mm-hmm.
she didn't know what was going on. A doctor's not meant to know everything as well, but when she didn't know what was going on, and she was coming back and thinking, this sounds like, an anxiety thing or something like that, and I just felt lost. I've just felt it, despite the experience that I've had through some clinical exposures, through some study, it still doesn't take away the actual emotional burden of all of this. And
Mm-hmm.
it put me back in square one, where I think, anyone else would have felt the exact same, that helplessness and that vulnerability, that um, that that place, that limbo where you don't know what's going on. And I think that's kind of the worst thing, having not knowing or not knowing. I think the worst place to be is in between.
Mm-hmm.
And that point you made is very important, because a lot of people do end up with having, vague symptoms. A lot of medical conditions, some of them are quite notorious for, chronic illness and being very difficult to treat, being very difficult to diagnose and know what's going on, what is actually happening beneath the scenes. And, a lot of people going through that, I think it's quite difficult, because a lot of the time they may go years and years before being formally diagnosed. And, that diagnosis is a form of catharsis, because
Mm-hmm.
when you have a name for something, it's like putting a name on the beast. You can finally do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes years to get to that point where you can actually name what's going on. Um, it can be the case. And I guess with me, I think it might just be a bit of luck on my side, to tell you the truth. But that's why I take it quite seriously. And the point you mentioned is very important, because now that I have this experience, I know how devastating or how difficult it could be for someone who has no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in my role to not dismiss things that might sound iffy or weird or non-textbook, but take it seriously, and maybe um, pay a bit more attention to it, because a lot of these details, it's just wanting to be listened to and understood, more so than I need you to tell me what is going on right now.
Right.
It's just having, for example, a doctor that was going to sit with me and figure out what these symptoms were and give me some sort of plan of what we could have do in terms of all the options. And that kind of empathy, I think, is something that was the biggest learning point from this entire experience. People sometimes don't need answers. They just need someone to listen to them and give them empathy, as cliche as it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And that can ease that entire burden of the process that you have to go through, because that's
Yeah.
an individual journey. And, some are more fortunate than others in that time frame of when they find out what's going on, versus some that may never.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I hope that answers that. I think it's a brilliant point to make.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, like obviously not taking anything away from your experience, because I'm sure like you were also in that form of anxiety, and I've seen at least in the last few years a couple of my friends go through similar experiences where they just can't figure out what's going on. And one of them just gave up at one point. He's like, you know what, maybe it's in my head. And quite often you start thinking that, right? It's like, okay, like I mentioned earlier, like maybe you get to that point where you're like, okay, am I making this up? Is the anxiety creating these symptoms? Maybe it is, right? So you start doubting yourself, and I, like I said, I've just seen that with my friends and the experiences they had. And it just, you sit there listening, and it's tough to hear, like just hearing someone go through that struggle, and just that constant, like, okay, I keep getting these symptoms, and I keep going to the doctors, and I keep coming home with no answers. And yeah, I just wanted to highlight how that in itself can create mental health concerns and issues, because you're constantly trying to find something that you may start doubting yourself at one point.
I definitely can empathize with that, because that phrase you said, I think, is synonymous to how I felt myself. The you know is this all just in my head?
Mm-hmm.
And that's this trapping feeling that you get, that I've had. I wish I could count how many times I've had that, but that exact feeling is something that I can resonate with to the core, and I can understand and empathize with how your friends would have felt, because it is a very difficult feeling. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you just absolutely don't know what's going on, sometimes we can internalize that blame, and it's this kind of spiraling loop of, is this anxiety causing more anxiety and coming back, and it's just a big state of confusion that just feeds onto itself, and it can be very difficult, to the
Mm-hmm.
point where sometimes, the only thing you can think of is giving up, because there's no solution in sight. So it is very difficult, and I think, your shared experience in that point, and combined with, I've gone through the same thing, so I can perfectly understand. I think a lot of people are going through the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even listening to this will give them a sense of comfort, knowing that it's not just them, it's not just in their head. There might be something more going along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess kind of shifting the focus now to your mental health journey, and obviously, you know, you said that your condition is something you've had to accept in your life, right? And the consequences of that, especially with the medication and the concern of potentially it getting worse. But like, talk about your mental health journey now. Like, what are some of the things you're doing, and why is it so important to you to have that mental health awareness now? And where would you like to take it?
Um, I guess the main point is, I think it's a very individual decision. I've always just been this kind of person that has been limiting myself, and on one aspect, I am just hungry to learn and hungry to do more, and hungry for opportunities to just make myself a bit better in any way, or help uh, make someone else's life better in some way. But I've always had this anxiety stop me from chasing opportunities and learning new things and putting myself on a new spot, to the point where over the years, at some point, maybe triggered by all these big changes in my life, have made me realize, what am I doing? How much more time am I going to waste? I need to be starting to do more things about it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, I never planned to get into medicine or anything like that. I've never had a big idea of where I was going to go in life. But I do know one thing: I like learning, and I do enjoy making other people's life a little bit easier and better. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of my major goals in life. And any way I can do that, um, through speaking about my experience on this podcast, by being a medical professional, by having my own little page where I share my stories and my reflections, I think every little bit counts. And even if one person could take away something from that, and go away feeling like they have been empowered in some sense, um, that is enough for me. And I think it's just my own lack of, how do I put it? It's just having to have dealt with a lot of lack of confidence, wanting
Mm-hmm.
to get out of that, wanting to create a better future for myself. And I still do. In all honesty, I'm not going to sit here and act as if I have got everything figured out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still at the crux of the transition between studies and a professional career. I still have a lot of life things to sort out and move forward with. So, that still brings along a lot of anxiety with it. But that's the major point. Um, we are all on this journey together,
Mm-hmm.
and there are all like a lot of similarities that we all have, regardless of age, regardless of culture, regardless of skin color.
Mm-hmm.
uh, we all could share in some aspect of our pain or doubts, or suffering. The circumstances might be different,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual emotion, the actual experience, a lot of the time is quite similar, and we can walk each other through it and
Mm-hmm.
empathize each other through it. And I feel like a lot of the time, a big thing that I've noticed is, when people go through a lot of mental health issues, personally, one of my biggest demons was never actually being vulnerable and opening up about it. And I think a lot of people also do that. And cultivating that sense of um, normal, that it is okay to have a bit of anxiety, a bit of depression, and it is okay to seek help for it, seek support, vocalize it. It does not take away your ability to perform in life. It does not make you any less of a person. These are just a very individual core beliefs that I strongly feel, and
Yeah.
I would like to not only talk about, but kind of actively live through and exemplify. So I feel like anyone could sit at the end of the table and say these things to another person, but I would like to push myself to be someone that can live out these things and inspire people to do more. So that is where I'm at and where I would like to go in the future with this. And this is why mental health is very important for me, especially. And, just the sense of general sense of kindness and altruism and having empathy for each other, because I really believe in this collective community. We all can teach each other a lot of things if we just open ourselves to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you've made a lot of great points, and everything you're saying, it's very noble and inspiring. So, I commend you on that and wish you the best of luck. And, one of the things you mentioned about a lot of people struggling with opening up, right? And there's that fear, and I don't know if that's something you went through. I remember going through it myself, struggling with talking about whatever mental health struggles I may have had at any given point, whether it was the anxiety or depression or just kind of struggling in silence. And I think my biggest fear, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to it, was if I open up and say something, now I'm going to be labeled as this person who's depressed or this person who's got anxiety. And I think the more people that talk about it, like yourself, and open up and share their own journey, I think there's the people that are really struggling in silence can feel like they're not alone. And I think when you're in that state, or when you're struggling, you tend to feel like you're the only one going through it, but you're not, right? And as soon as you, like you've said a few times, are able to get to that space of vulnerability and ask for help, you realize that you're not alone, and you feel this sense of empowerment and freedom with just taking that step. And I don't know if that's something you experience, where maybe you tried to do it alone, and then at some point you realize that it's exhausting. And I know that's how I felt.
Oh, definitely. I can think back to a lot of times when I've had to deal with those kind of feelings by myself, and I've had a long time of this attitude where I thought I could just handle everything myself. But realistically, there's only so much one person can do. And at some point, it might happen and go. You might be pushing yourself quite hard and achieving things, but it eventually does catch up to you, and it burns you out, and it burns you out to the core, and can leave you depleted in an emotional and physical way. So I have had that experience before, and it wasn't a very pretty part of life. I remember, I think one of the most important times that made me realize that that was not a good way to go was when someone very important to me at the time actually commented and said, this is actually not healthy for you. You need to change. For lack of better words, just paraphrasing, but it took someone else to notice and let me know, to just, drive that nail into my mind that, hey, what I'm doing is not right. I can do this better. It's still difficult. And that labeling, that stigma does exist. And, I look up to a lot of people who are very empowered, who talk openly, and I appreciate honesty. That's one of the core values that I truly find important. But, when you're able to discuss these things with people, you normalize it. When you're not beating around the bush with these things, even when you're asking someone, are you feeling down, you can just, be quite direct about these issues. It's okay, because a lot of the time people, like you said, people are scared to talk about these things. But what is important is empowering these conversations more than like hushing them down and beating around the bush about them, because that just further perpetuates the stigma around them. But we've made a lot of progress as a society on that, but it's still a difficult battle to do. And individually, a prime example is facing my vulnerability and talking about my stories. I'm a very much private person, so
Yeah.
I never thought I would open up a small Instagram and page and make it a public profile and discuss my thoughts through stories and whatever I put up for anyone to read, including a lot of the people that know me on an actual, real life basis.
Yeah.
But it's been quite empowering because I've met a lot of people and heard a lot of stories from people who I knew in life in a day-to-day basis, and receiving messages from them saying that, people who I previously never talked much to before suddenly messaging me and telling me that, something that I posted resonated with them, and something that some other person saying, this really is what I'm feeling right now. It just made me think, I'm not putting anything out there special. I'm sure there's another 20 pages out there putting the same kind of things, but like it's that shared reflection. What I feel is what a lot of people feel, but taking that step and just putting myself out there gives the permission not only for myself to come to terms with it, but
Yeah.
also empowers other people to take that step, which is very important in
Mm-hmm.
normalizing this, not just for me, but for everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to your point, the normalization is the biggest piece. The more we talk about it, the more normal it becomes. And to your point, it gives other people that empowerment to also take that step of opening up and asking for help. And essentially that's where it needs to start, is being able to feel safe and having that ability to ask for help. So, I thank you again for sharing your story, and I commend you for all the work you're doing, and just having that change in perspective on how this experience has allowed you to see things differently, and giving you that I guess purpose in terms of being able to help others in that sense. And I think that's very powerful, where people can take personal experiences and use that as growth, but not only growth for themselves, but also having that like I said, purpose to want help others who are potentially struggling in the same way, or in different ways. And that's powerful, I think. And if we can all do that, that'd be amazing. So thank you again for doing that. And I guess for listeners that want to get a hold of you, whether it's online or social media, what are some of the ways they can find you and kind of like be a part of your community?
So I'm mainly quite active on my Instagram page. I'm not a very huge social person, but
Mm-hmm.
my Instagram page is at Today We Grow. So TODAYWEGOROW. And I just post a lot of the things that we discussed about, just reflections, quotes, little short pieces of writing, along
Mm-hmm.
with stuff that in an aesthetic that I find resonating with how I feel is appropriate for those posts. And I really appreciate this platform that you've created to allow people to really come on and express their different ideas. And ultimately, I think it is about creating that purpose. I really believe it's not so much finding a purpose, but having the cards you dealt with and creating a purpose out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And all the better if we can do that together. And that's the point of Today We Grow. It's to walk together hand in hand, not one person telling other people what to do, but we're all teaching each other and going along the way. So I really appreciate being a part of this and having a chance to discuss these very important things
Yeah,
today.
no, thank you very much. And, again, super grateful for you to take the time and have this conversation with me, and being vulnerable to share your story. So, just wanted to, pass on my gratitude for that. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. As always, please subscribe to the podcast if you enjoy the episodes, or leave a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. Thank you again. And until next week.